Hello and welcome back to the Stitch Create Love YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how I cast on my toe-up socks, and this is the cast on method that is written out in my soon to be released Flight of the Bumblebee Socks pattern. So I'm going to use some nice big needles for you so that you can see what I'm doing, and some nice DK weight brightly coloured yarn so that you can see what I'm doing as well. So the first thing that we need to do is take some of our yarn, and we're going to have our tail towards the back and we're going to have our working yarn towards the front. So tail at the back, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drape the yarn over my index finger and my thumb, tail at the back, and I'm going to grab my tail and my working yarn with my index finger and my small finger here. And remember, I'll keep saying it, you've got your tail at the back and you've got your working yarn at the front. I'm going to make sure that I've just got a nice long tail there. Okay, we're not going to want to do this too tightly, but equally you don't want to make it really loose as well. So just pay attention to your tension whilst you're doing this. Then we're going to take our needles, and I'm going to be using magic loop. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loop the yarn over my back needle, and that's going to form our first stitch. We're going to want to cast on 16 stitches here, which is going to be 8 stitches per needle. So to make our second stitch, we need to make it on the front needle. So we're going to take our yarn from the back, we're going to swing our needles round, we're going to bring that back yarn around our front needle and through the middle, and that is our second stitch. Now that we've done that, we want to make a stitch again on our back needle, so we're going to do that using the yarn in the front, which is our working yarn. We're going to swing our needles around, we're going to wrap the working yarn around the back needle and through the middle, and that's 3 stitches. And we're just going to continue like that, alternating between putting a stitch on the front needle and putting a stitch on the back needle. So it's swing your needles to the back to make a stitch on the front, swing your needles to the front to make a stitch on the back. I'm just going to do that nice and slowly for you, and you can see I'm not doing it too tightly. I've got 6 there, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14, 15 and 16. I'm hoping you can see what I'm doing, and I'm hoping it's not blurring out too much for you. It's very difficult to look at the camera rather than your hands when you're doing this. So I'm just going to check. I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 on my front needle, and I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 on my back needle. So that's my 16 stitches. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie very loosely a single knot in my yarn to attach my working yarn and my tail together, just to secure my stitches. So I've just looped them together through there, and I'm just going to pull it tight. If I turn that round for you so that you can see what I'm doing underneath, it might be a little bit easier. So there we go, I've tied that. So that's the point that we're up to. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my needles around so that I can begin working the first instruction after I've cast on my 16 stitches. I'm going to pull out the front needle. This is a little bit contrary to what you would normally do with magic loop, because you'll be used to pulling out the back needle, but you're going to pull out the front needle first of all. I'm just going to keep hold of my stitches, pull out the front needle, and you can see that everything's getting a bit tangled up here. But here is my front needle, and I'm going to knit across all of the stitches on my back needle using my front needle. So I'm going to pop my needle into my first stitch, and I'm going to make sure that I've got my working yarn and not my tail, and then I'm going to knit across all of those stitches. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. I've knit across all the stitches on my back needle. So now I'm going to put my needles back to being parallel to each other. So I've got my needles parallel to each other again, and I'm going to pull out my front needle again, and this time I'm going to knit across all the stitches on my back needle through the back of the loop. So pull out the front needle, and then we're knitting through the back loop. First one can be a little bit tricky to do, particularly when you're trying to film it. Okay, so I'm in the back of the loop, and I just want to make sure again that I've got my working yarn here and not my tail that I'm working with. So I'm knitting 1 through the back of the loop, I'm knitting 2 through the back of the loop, I'm knitting 3 through the back of the loop, 4 through the back of the loop, 5 through the back of the loop, 6 through the back of the loop, 7 through the back of the loop, and 8 through the back of the loop. And then I'm going to bring my needles around again so that they are parallel to each other. And that is the first round completed. So let me just pull everything back into place. So we've done our first round. We've knitted across the stitches on our back needle, and then we've turned it around and knitted through the back of the loop on the stitches on our back needle. Now, to do our second round, we're going to keep pulling out our front needle again. So we're going to pull out our front needle, and this time we want to be increasing our stitches at each end of our back needle. So we're going to knit into the front and the back of our first stitch. So we're going to knit into the front of it first of all. Again, make sure that you've got your working yarn and not your tail. That's my tail there, and this is my working yarn. So I'm going to knit into the front of the stitch, and then before I take it off my needle, I'm going to knit into the back of it as well. So we're making 2 stitches out of 1. So I've knitted into the front and back of that stitch. Then you're going to knit to your last stitch, and you're going to knit into the front and back of your last stitch again. So you're going to knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we're at our final stitch, so I'm going to knit into the front and the back of it again. So into the front, and then before I take it off my left needle, I'm going to knit into the back of it as well, so through the back loop effectively. Okay, and that's all my stitches on that needle worked. So I'm going to turn around again. I'm going to bring my needles back parallel, which is a little bit fiddly because we've only just cast on, but we've got them there again. And then I'm going to repeat what I've just done again. I'm going to pull out my front needle, and I'm going to increase 1 stitch at either end here. So I'm going to pull out my front needle, and then I'm going to knit into the front and the back of my first stitch. So I'm knitting into the front of it, and before I take it off my left needle, I'm going to knit into the back of it, which can be a little bit tricky with your first stitch. So I'm knitting into the back of it as well, and then I'm going to knit until the final stitch again. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now I'm to my final stitch, so I'm going to knit into the front and the back of it again. So I'm going to knit into the front, then before I take it off my left needle, I'm going to knit into the back, making 2 stitches out of 1, and then I'm going to bring everything back round again. So that is our second round completed. So let's just get these needles nice and parallel so that we can see what we're doing. So if I count my stitches now, you can see that I've increased. I've got 10 on each needle. I've got 2, I've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the same on the front. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The next instruction for casting on tells you to turn your work over. So turn your work over doesn't mean turn your work like that. It means turn it over. So we're going to turn it one way to the other. So turn it over like this. And now you can see here, what we've got here is the wrong side of our work. So we're going to poke that down between there. And now that we've turned it over, we can continue as you normally would do with magic loop, with pulling out your back needle and working across the stitches on the front needle. So my first instruction for my next round is to knit all stitches. So I'm going to pull out my back needle and I'm just going to knit across all of the stitches. I'm going to do that by taking my working yarn and not my tail. So I'm going to go into my stitch, that's my tail, and here is my working yarn. So I'm just going to knit across all of the stitches. So I'm knitting across 10 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I'm knitting across all the stitches, so I need to knit the rest now. So we're going to turn it round so that we've got our work parallel, and you can see now I'm pulling the front needle back into place because we've turned our work over. And then I'm going to pull out my back needle and I'm going to knit across the stitches on my front needle. And you can see as you go along it becomes much easier to work out whether you're supposed to be using your working yarn or your tail. Your tail disappears inside your work. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8. It would help if I went into the stitch. 9 and 10. And then you're just going to continue in that way, working through your pattern, continuing to pull your back needle out and work across the stitches on your front needle. I hope you found that helpful, and I hope that it helps you to try some toe-up socks if you haven't done so before. Thank you for watching.